Welcome everyone to day 3 of our week-long SIEPR Economic Summit. I'm Mark Duggan, the Trione Director of the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and I'm really excited for today's conversation between Jeff Raikes and Satya Nadella. There's just so much these two can talk about, and we're going to try to cram a lot into the next 25 minutes. So let me get right to some brief introductions. Jeff Raikes is the chair of Stanford's Board of Trustees and is the co-founder of the Raikes Foundation with his wife, Tricia. The foundation focuses on youth-serving systems, seeking to make them work better on behalf of the most marginalized young people in our society. Jeff is also the former CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he led the foundation's efforts to promote equity for all people around the world. Before that, he was president of Microsoft's business division. He began his career with Microsoft 40 years ago in 1981 and was instrumental in creating the Microsoft Office suite that so many of us rely on pretty much every day. Satya Nadella is another name that we're all incredibly familiar with too. He has been the CEO of Microsoft since 2014 and has held several key roles at the company since joining Microsoft in 1992. He was the executive vice president of Microsoft's Cloud and Enterprise Group, where he led the transformation to the cloud infrastructure and services business, which outperformed the market and took share from competition. He also serves on the board of trustees to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center and his alma mater, the University of Chicago. And he's also on the Starbucks board of directors. I can go on and on talking about the accomplishments and impact of these two men, but let me turn things over to Jeff, who's going to talk a little more about his relationship with Satya and then launch into what I know is going to be a real highlight of our SIEPR Economic Summit. Please take it away, Jeff.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And I just want to say I'm so glad to join you all for this year's SIEPR Economic Summit. And I want to thank all of the organizers at SIEPR who have put together this really impressive event. It comes at such a crucial moment. It has been a tumultuous and unpredictable 12 months in our society and in our economy. And so as we look to the future, the evidence-based research and analysis that are SIEPR's hallmark can really help inform our way forward. And I'm delighted that Satya is going to join us today to share his thoughts on the path ahead. You know, I had the good fortune to overlap with Satya for 17 of my 27 years at Microsoft. And during that time, I developed great admiration for both his intellect and his leadership qualities. And I could go on and on, but I'm just going to highlight one particular quality today. When we worked at Microsoft, we worked with and for leaders who competed to be the smartest person in the room. That was what they aspired to be. Satya always focused on being the most intellectually curious person in the room. His brilliance is matched with his humility. And that's exactly what I hope Stanford does for its students. Now with Satya today, we're going to talk about what the world will look like over the next decade, from the future of work to technological advances on the horizon, and how we can transform our organizations to help us get there. So, you know, it's an honor to be able to tap into Satya's knowledge, experience, and intellect. And so we're going to hop right into it. Satya, it's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's fantastic to be with you. And also thanks, Mark, for the opportunity. Really a pleasure to be able to join you all.
Right. So Satya, I want to begin with futurism and digital transformation. You know, the pandemic has forced companies to really transform with urgencies. You know, industries are grappling with the acceleration of long-term structural changes. So I'm going to ask you to take out your crystal ball. What is the world going to look like in 2030? What must organizations do to accelerate their transformation out of the pandemic and into the future?
No, it's a fascinating question, Jeff, and I've been thinking quite a bit about it in the sense of it was exactly perhaps 10 odd years ago when we started recognizing, for example, what the cloud transformation would mean to Microsoft and the industry. Coming out of this pandemic, for sure, digital technology as being core to both resilience and transformation is probably one of the biggest takeaways, right? I mean, it's the most malleable resource we have. It is most useful for even resilience, but more importantly, the structural change that we will have, whether it's in healthcare or in retail or in manufacturing, is going to have a digital component. It's not the only component, but it's one of the most critical components. So in that aspect, there are a couple of things, at least I've been thinking about. One is just the ubiquity. Like if you say 2030, will there be more computing than in 2021? Absolutely. The shape of that computing, I believe, will be different in the sense it's going to be much more embedded in the world. Right, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's in the factory floor, whether it's in the retail outlet, what have you. So computing, as it gets embedded, it changes the architecture. It's going to be more decentralized. In an interesting way, you could say cloud re-centralized some of the compute. I think in the next 10 years, we will see more decentralization. It's not going to be a throwback to the 90s or the 2000s of client server, but it is going to be decentralization. Some of it is also going to be driven because of the geopolitics. I mean, think about data sovereignty, right? It's a top issue everywhere. Every country will want to have more sovereignty and control. So that's another aspect that I think is going to play out. The one other piece, in fact, I was looking at the AI index. I think this is, Stanford put out, I think in the last couple of days even, their, state of the union on what AI looks like. The interesting thing I'm finding there is you are going to have these large-scale AI models on one end. They themselves become platforms. For example, we have partnered deeply with folks like OpenAI who are creating these large-scale multimodal models that are going to have more, analytical power, predictive power on one end. And on the other end, you're also going to have more private federated learning and things that really preserve privacy and yet are really delivering personalization. So some of these fundamental architectural changes on how the shape of compute, the way we do logic, which is using AI, are going to then ultimately transform personalized medicine, personalized shopping, and also how does one really change the core activities in manufacturing or other industries. So that's sort of at least how I look at it.
Oh, that's fabulous. So let me take that umbrella vision of the world that you've described, and now let's kind of dig in to the trends and innovations. What new frontiers and technological advancements most excite you? And you've already answered part of my next question, which is what trends are you monitoring relative to advances in AI? I'm glad you're looking at that Stanford research, but how about the technological advancements that most excite you and the trends that you're seeing in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, in fact, I want to pick up one of the things that, obviously you worked on when you were at Microsoft. And this year, in fact, as we speak, yesterday we kicked off one of our biggest industry events called Ignite. Interestingly enough, that conference, my own keynote, we held it. Of course, you could join it as 2D video, but you could also join it in alt space, which is our virtual space where people can join using any VR goggles, right? It can be, in fact, you can be on a phone or you can be on Oculus or HoloLens. But the interesting thing I've always felt, and this is something that, all through your time at Microsoft and my time at Microsoft, I've always felt that there are only two categories really that matter: information management. How do you schematize the world's knowledge? And the other is the most natural user interface. And in fact, the most natural user interface would be where screens are not even mediating the interaction. So you and I, like today, you and I are having a synchronous video call. In the alt space and yesterday's keynote, basically, I could join and be in an immersive space, in that case, as an avatar or as a hologram. I mean, so think about it, right? Once you have presence, you transcend everything, right? So which is two people are able to sort of transcend space, be together, can naturally interact with each other and collaborate. That requires so many different changes, right? It changes communications, the fact that you have a hologram with all of the eye tracking and the hand gesture tracking, that's AI. And it's AI at the edge of the cloud, right? So you don't have enough. In order to move the polygons fast enough, you need to have compute power on board in front of your eyes as opposed to rendezvousing with the cloud. So I think about some of the advances in AI meeting this decentralized compute architecture, ultimately translating into the most natural computer-mediated work is probably what I'm most excited about in some sort of bringing all that together. I sort of think, you and I have been, let's take telemedicine. We've been talking about it for 20 years plus. It's now mainstream. Meetings are still going to be mainstream in 2030, right? We're going to, but the nature of the way people come together, congregate, collaborate will fundamentally change.
Yeah, well, fabulous. So let's pick up on that and talk a little bit about the future of work and what you are seeing and thinking related to the future of work, how teams are going to work together in this post-pandemic environment.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we are learning a lot, Jeff, in just looking at all the data even, and how are people able to continue to be productive? What is even the definition of productivity? Like, should we talk about it not just as output in a narrow sense, but take learning, building up of social capital, well-being, all of these aspects, and looking at it. And the reality is we are seeing, first of all, there are differences. Geographically, this pandemic is at different points in different places, right? What's happening in China is very different than what's in the US today. What's happening in India is different in the US. It's different by function. For example, it's fascinating I had not realized this going into the pandemic, that game studios are very different than, say, my compiler teams, right? Which is the productivity of these things are different. And so taking all that data, I would say there are three broad I would say levers, or you could say dimensions of change. One is around collaboration. The reality is we have to think about collaboration before, during, and after meetings, right? So it's not just about video meetings. Coming out of the pandemic, in fact, you and I were just talking about this before we got on the call, it's going to get more complicated, right? Which is, once people are more hybrid, there's going to be more flexibility. People sometimes maybe in one conference room together. So we need flexible tools that accommodate for that hybrid work. The second aspect of collaboration, this pandemic accelerated a trend, which I think is fantastic and positive, which is first-line workers for the first time are now collaborating with knowledge workers using digital tools, right? I mean, a classic case is somebody is in a manufacturing line. In fact, now they're being issued HoloLens because through that, they can call an engineer who may be working remotely from home, and the engineer can direct this person on the front line to do, say, complex operations. And it's got so many positives out of it, right? Which is they're being skilled, they're being more productive, and yet the business is able to draw on the skills of both the frontline and the knowledge worker in collaboration. So that, again, I think is happening in healthcare, it's happening in manufacturing, it's happening in retail. So collaboration structurally, I believe, will be different. The second aspect is learning. I mean, first of all, I think all of us, especially in corporate America, have to spend more and allocate more to learning. But the point about learning and reskilling programs historically has always been that we never had a good feedback loop between the jobs, especially the future jobs, and the skills being acquired. So learning in the context of the workflow tools will be one of the biggest changes I see going forward, right? So while you are in your job, the content is coming to you, the expert is being found so that you can be more skilled and, by the way, credentialed even. So that's another aspect we're doing a lot to create that feedback loop between jobs to be done and the skills to be acquired and credentials to be acquired. And then the last one is probably well-being. This is where, that narrow definition of productivity needs to be redefined. I mean, take even video meetings. I mean, it's sort of now, I think even Stanford's done work to sort of say, hey, there is such a thing called video meeting fatigue because of the concentration effects. And so even in Teams, we innovated to bring the together mode, primarily because of that. Together mode sort of takes you out of that grid view, puts you together, creates that feeling which you have in regular conference rooms where you're not focused on one person. So that's just one technology-based answer, but I think even the management practices of how one schedules meetings, how one tracks the overall well-being and burnout of people in the team, these are going to be first-class issues that we have to deal with. So future of work is about flexibility. It's about new ways of collaborating, new ways of learning, and thinking about well-being as a first-class construct.
Yeah, That's great. So now let's pivot to a subject that I know is very important to both of us, given our own life experiences, rural America, you growing up in India, the people we have had the chance to interact with. I want to ask you about inclusive technology. Are you optimistic? And if so, what drives your optimism that the benefits of the innovations that we're talking about are going to be shared broadly?
It's a super important topic, as you said, right? The Microsoft, both you and I have grown up with, it's fascinating. I always think about this, right? Which is whenever I visit any community in the United States or any country in the world, the first thing I look for is, hey, how many people are there, for example, in our partner channel? What's the employment growth in our partner channel? What is the wages in the partner channel? How are small businesses in that country or region becoming more productive because of whatever it is that we're helping them do? Or large multinationals in that part of the world becoming more competitive and, in growing their employment, or public sector becoming more efficient? Health outcomes, education. That's the kind of schema I have, which I learned from people like you. That's sort of the Microsoft that I sort of grew up in. And I think that that's what's going to be really important, which is in the core of your business model. I think that all of us have to sort of make sure that there is surplus that's getting created that is broad. And what do I mean by that? It needs to, for example, include first-line workers, and perhaps more increased productivity and wage support for them, and knowledge workers, right? So that's one way for things to be more equitable, right? Even with increased automation, that's perhaps the place where I think some of the academic research and practical empirical work should prove that, wow, look at first-line workers. They're being issued HoloLenses. They're being more productive. Therefore, maybe they need even better wage support, which sort of mirrors a lot of what we sort of today give knowledge workers. Second is it needs to be broad sectoral, Jeff. I mean, it's not about, for all of our success in the West Coast of the United States or in the East Coast of China, that's not enough, right? So it needs to be geographically spread. It can't be about just the tech industry. It has to be about agri-tech. It's got to be about fintech. It's got to be about every part of the economy also benefiting from the advances in technology. So I'm optimistic that structurally in 10 years from now, we will see more even spread. One other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and this is another place where I would love for more academic research, is I feel like even in the last 10 years, the world has seen tremendous innovation in consumption, right? If you'd say, wow, was I binge watching as much as I am today 10 years ago? No. Or shopping online, or pick your favorite activity. I mean, there's been great innovation. These are all things that every economist, I'm sure, will say is all good surplus. But at some level, we need to strike a new balance between what I'll call creation and consumption. So I do think that there needs to be further democratization of all forms of creation. And you start seeing it, right? Which is, it can, in our case, we think about developers. The one phenomena I'm very excited about is the citizen developer. The domain expert at Swedish Hospital in Seattle built a simple app to track the N95 mass. That person was able to do that because the tools themselves became easy. So that's another side of what I think will create more of that equitable distribution. And so that's at least how I think technology can lead to more inclusive growth. But, to me, it does require us to think more about that balance between consumption and creation and that cross-sectoral growth.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a very important concept, the notion of equitable consumption, equitable development. So let's talk a little bit more about equity. Before the pandemic, the world was facing big challenges: climate change, structural racism, economic insecurity, wealth inequality, and more. And, we've seen some of that progress that we were making on those issues undermined by a public health crisis and a global economic downturn. So, with your leadership of Microsoft, but also I think really in the industry, what is the responsibility of the corporations? What's the responsibility that you and your peers think about in addressing these challenges, particularly the underlying connection to racial justice in the United States and elsewhere?
It's a super, obviously, important topic for us. The definition of the social purpose of a corporation, if I could call it that, or the social contract even of a company, that I like is by Colin Mayer, who's an economist at Oxford, where he talks about it's finding, the social purpose of a company is to find profitable solutions to the challenges of people and planet. And the two keywords is that profitable solutions and then the challenges of people and planet. And I like that because, after all, businesses are about capital allocation that really does create profit ultimately. But the point is that profit is being created by solving the challenges of people and planet. So even foundationally, to your previous question, driving broad economic growth, after all, is perhaps the biggest thing that a company can do. Because, I mean, to some degree, I'm like a bit on that Robert Gordon sort of camp, which is, God, for all this technology, where is that broad economic growth? People describe it as, hey, I saw it. In fact, the last time, at least I take great pride in it, you should too, which is the PC when it penetrated knowledge work. There was real digital technology leading to productivity growth. And people argue whether it's real, maybe it's measurement problems or what have you. But going forward, I think the first thing, in order to have the pie distributed evenly, the pie should first grow. Then, if let's assume the pie grows and has all those attributes being cross-sectoral and across all countries, then I think you are absolutely right. We've got to pay a lot of attention to, for example, does it include first-line workers and knowledge workers? What are the impact of things like automation doing to the job market? I generally don't fall for the sort of fallacy of what the economists describe sometimes as jobs that get created are not accounted for, or new jobs will evolve. We can never know. So we do need to be sort of viewing what are the new jobs and then really making sure that we're skilling for it. The second aspect, though, to your take something like racial justice, I think you have to sort of make real commitments. So inside of Microsoft, for example, we have said we want to double the number of people who are African American and Black inside of Microsoft managerial roles and senior technical roles. And that's a commitment we have between now and 2025. We're working, every quarter to track that and make progress. Similarly, commitments you have to make, even like the one finite resource we have, for example, is the planet. So what is Microsoft's own greenhouse emissions? What do we do with our ecosystem of partners and our suppliers? So whether it's racial justice or climate change, in your core operations, how do you make real commitments that become core part of your business, just like, growing revenue and growing profit?
Yeah. So let's turn to the subject of trust. We are seeing technology transform organizations in the world. You and I grew up with that. There have been some key trends in the past few years, social media, et cetera. And those have raised big questions about trust in technology companies. And so I want to hear how you think about maintaining the trust of customers, maintaining the trust of the public.
Yeah. Again, in fact, one of the ways I think and talk about it is trust by design, right? So in some sense, it has to be designed, for example, in the core of your business model, right? So if the world around you is doing well and you're doing well, that means there is trust that you are not profiting and rent seeking in the world, but you are in fact making sure that the surplus that gets created around you is greater. In fact, it's, if you remember, like there's to be a thing called the Bill Gates line in platforms, which is if the value above the platform is more than in the platform, then it's stable. If it's not, it's not stable. And I like that definition. Then to your point, beyond that though, you need to, by design, for example, take AI ethics. You can't say, hey, look, I abdicate control over the AI or responsibility for AI. You've got to literally take in the engineering processes, the design principles that are, for example, doing some of these large scale models and make sure that they're not inherently biased. And so therefore, I think having the engineering, I would say, process and state-of-the-art work going into ensuring that things are not just scaling and breaking in the real world, but you are at the unit of scale of one, you're fixing some of the core issues. Same thing with sort of security. If you look at even in the pandemic, the people who have been most impacted by, let's say, ransomware are small businesses and citizens. So you do need to build, again, trust into the technology, and things like zero trust principles have to be built in by design. So I feel that it's in the core business model and in the core product or service, you need to build what is the currency of trust. Trust is not sort of claimed, but it's earned. And that's going to have to be done by design.
Got it. Well, I know we need to get you back to Ignite, so I'll just end with one last question. Leaders in our audience, they've faced extreme challenges in the last year. So what advice do you offer leaders inside Microsoft, and what advice do you have for leaders in our audience today?
One thing, Jeff, having sort of worked for you and sort of observed many leaders through my career at Microsoft, I feel like there are a couple of attributes of leaders that I try to hold as a mirror to myself every day. The first thing is leaders have these innate capability to go into situations that are uncertain, ambiguous, and bring clarity. Right? So leaders are not people who go into an uncertain, confusing situation and create more confusion. They actually create clarity. And that's sort of one thing that leaders absolutely have to hold themselves to as accountable. Second is leaders create energy. You know when you met someone who is a leader because you walk out saying, wow, I want to join the parade. I want to be part of that team. So it's just saying, oh, my team is great and everybody else sucks. That's not leadership. In a multi-stakeholder, multi-constituent world, you got to bring people across your enterprise and outside together. So creating that energy. And lastly, leaders don't say, give me the perfect pitch in order to perform, right? I mean, it's like, I can't say, let me wait for the pandemic to be done to show my leadership skills. I mean, you have to take an over-constrained problem in many cases and unconstrain yourself. And unconstrain more particularly the team that you're leading so that they can go on to achieve things. So those three things about driving clarity, creating energy, and success, to me, is what leaders naturally do. None of us are going to be 100% perfect, but at least that's kind of what I say. Am I better at it today than I was yesterday?
Well, I think you're doing a fabulous job. We're grateful to have you as a leader of Microsoft, a leader in the tech industry, and I'm grateful for our friendship. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights into where the world is heading over the next decade. And all the best to you and your family, Satya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff and Satya. That was really a tremendous conversation, and I really appreciate you both taking the time to be with us today. And thanks to everyone in the audience for tuning in. I hope you'll be joining us tomorrow for our panel discussion on the future of college sports. And if you've registered for our special SIEPR Associate session with Jeff and our SIEPR Senior Fellows, Eric Brynjolfsson and Susan Athey, I'll see you over there in just a few minutes. And remember that we'll have video recordings of all of the main summit panels and speakers on our website in the days ahead. So I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and thank you so much again. Bye-bye.